Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 116 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined, as always, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans.
Hello, hello. So this is College Football Throwdown, a college football podcast by college football fans for college football fans. Father-son duo here to talk about all things going on in the broader world of college football, as well as our favorite beloved team, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And there's a lot to talk about on that front this particular episode, with some news about our head coach and all that. But before we dive into any of that, we're going to do our traditional beverage to start off the podcast, as well as that our recap of the Ohio State game.
That sounds good. I'm going to opt out of the beer thing. You're going to carry the mantle for this week, as I have a nice glass of ice water in my possession right here. So I'm going to drink that tonight.
All right. And I have I have my last Sapporo here, the Japanese beer. So
yeah,
here we go.
Well, are you planning on getting some more of that, like before we see each other at the holiday?
Maybe. We'll see.
Well, if you do, then you can bring it down with you, and we'll have one together.
We could do that. Yeah, we will be together for the Thanksgiving holiday this year, which means
for the Iowa game.
Yes, we'll be together for the Iowa game, so we'll do a podcast in person after that game for sure.
Yep.
And that'll also be the preview for like all the conference championships at that point in the season, I think. So that'll be a good one.
Yes, it would be. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. All right. So to dive into that Ohio State game, as we mentioned at the start, we gave our usual predictions on the previous podcast, episode 115. We both predicted that Ohio State would win, although by different margins. I said 52-24. You said 63-17. So just looking at that, when you look at the final score of the actual game, 26-17, any reasonable third party would say, well, that's great. You know, you guys did way better than you thought, which is true.
Yoo-hoo, another moral victory.
It's true on the one hand. I saw somebody saying, oh man, we didn't lose by less than 7 points this time. We lost by 9 points. Such a difference, you know?
Exactly.
So this was a game that we're not going to spend too much time on, because it's frankly a broken record of many things we've said previously on the podcast. But I think it is worth commending Scott and the general program on the fact that we were worried last week that this might be where Scott started to lose the team because of all the disappointing losses this season and staring down such a tough end of the year schedule, as well as worrying about many empty seats in Memorial Stadium because of how badly we're going to get our butts kicked and everything. But from what I saw, Memorial Stadium was rocking nice and loud, you know, causing Ohio State a few false start penalties. And the defense, at the very least, definitely came to play. Took Ohio State, who I believe is one of the top scoring offenses in the entire country, held them to 26 points, got 2 interceptions. Really, really proud of the way that they came out and played. JoJo Doman had a terrific game. So there was a lot to like on that front. It was more on the offensive side and special teams where we were let down once again, which again has been the repeating theme of this season.
Exactly. And as you said, we just don't want to beat a dead horse, or play the broken record. But the bottom line is that we again rose to the occasion, especially defensively, and competed with one of the better teams in the country, but then found enough ways to, basically shoot ourselves in the foot, damage our chance to win with, a variety of things. Again, kicking game became an issue for us, like it has every one of these times, it seems like. both field goal and punter, and um, and then really badly timed penalties that were very much a problem, and then on offense, uh, play calls that just caused me to scratch my head. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think the turning point in the game was where we scored in the, I believe it was like late in the third quarter, with one of those long passes to Toure, who also had a great game. And that was, he had one huge run earlier in the game, which gave us a much needed touchdown. And then the second run was even better because he like did some moves to make some guys miss, got all the way down to like the 2 yard line or something like that. Really, really great run by him. So we scored there. Then our defense comes out, gets another interception on Ohio State, and we have the ball at like the 30-yard line or so of our own side. And it seems like we've got all the momentum, the crowd's into it, and if we were able to get a touchdown there, we would have gone up, I believe, in
yes,
score.
that would have been in the third quarter, right?
Well,
That's when
it
that.
was right at like the end of the third quarter into the fourth was when this was
Yeah, yeah,
happening. Yeah.
yep,
And that was the one where, and we had some success on offense, getting some first downs, but then, I think we ran it twice for like 7 yards and then threw it on third down for nothing. And we bring out our kicker who had missed a 45-yarder earlier and then made like a 35-yarder or something like that, so, and this was like a 28-yarder or something. So definitely, within his range of what he's shown to be able to do. And he shanks it. And that one really hurt because we really needed 7 points, but then to not get any points, to walk away without even 3 points, was really rough in that situation. And Ohio State kind of capitalized from there. And
yes, it sucked the wind out of the stadium. Everything, it was awful.
yeah, it was a 31-yarder, actually. I've got it here. We had the ball on the 29-yard line. So that was a rough one. And, Ohio State on the reverse side had, I think, 3 field goals over the course of the game that they all hit. Similarly, our punter, he kicked like a,
including Alex, I believe, like a 50-yard field goal. So I mean, this guy, he hit some long field goals.
yeah, there was the one near the end of the game was a longer one, I believe. Yeah. Our punter, once again, it was, I think, on the series before his bad punt, he kicked like a great 60-yard punt, made the Ohio State guy have to
Yep.
go backwards to get it,
Yep.
and we averaged actually 43 yards on 8 punts over the course of the game. So when you look at that, that's a solid
Yep.
average, but hidden within there is the fact that one punt went for like 13 yards
11. Yeah,
something like that,
exactly.
right? Which was,
Right.
at a terrible point in the game to do that. So
Right. Right.
it's clear that the talent is there. It's just the consistency on game day that's needed.
Yep. Exactly. So that is the same old story, and what's led us to having to make changes or whatever, and to consider firing our coach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Ohio State had Garrett Wilson, their great wide receiver, was injured. So he wasn't in the game. And they had 8 penalties over the course of the game for 65 yards. So, 2 interceptions, whereas we had no turnovers until the very end of the game when it was already over at that point. So really, I mean, we had, they weren't playing their best. So this was our opportunity to strike. We were playing at home. It's one of those
Yep.
situations where we've seen other teams in the Big Ten that are considered to be lesser than us capitalize in those sorts of situations, and we just can't find a way to do it.
Exactly. That is exactly right.
So that was, commendable that we played them close and everything, but still disappointing, of course, because you want to win those close games. We really needed, a big win here in these last 3 games.
Yeah. Not just want to. If you're Scott Frost, you need to.
You need to. Well, that's what I was said on the previous podcast, and we were texting, I believe, right after the game, and my what I was saying was Scott needs to win one more game amongst these last 3 against Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Iowa. I felt like if he lost all of them and had only 3 wins at the end of the year, that had to be it for him. Excuse me, because it's just an unacceptable result for a year 4 coach at Nebraska, right? However, Monday, the big news dropped from Trev Alberts, our athletic director at the University of Nebraska, that Scott Frost will be remaining as our coach into next year. However, it is on a restructured contract. And some of the details were revealed, like the fact that his pay is dropping from $5 million to $4 million. And importantly, if we were to fire him next year, his buyout would have been $15 million. That's been halved to $7.5 million. Alberts did say that he did not require any coaching changes from Scott, but apparently Scott, on his own accord, decided that he needed to clean some house on the offensive side of the coaching staff. And so Matt Lubick, our offensive coordinator, Mario Verduzco, our quarterbacks coach, our running backs coach Ryan Held, and our offensive line coach Greg Austin were all immediately terminated. Only Sean Beckton, our tight ends coach, is remaining on the offensive side of the ball in terms of coaching. So this was quite the statement from both Alberts and Frost, clearly that they know that, next year is the do or die year, and Scott is willing to make some significant financial sacrifices for his own well-being to have kind of another shot. Saw a lot of people comparing it to what happened with Jim Harbaugh last year with his contract negotiation as well. So what was your first reaction when you saw the news, Dad?
I was, number one, I would say that I wasn't completely surprised, because we had discussed, I believe, on the previous podcast, that if a change was going to happen, there was kind of 3 options. And frankly, one of them was exactly what transpired. I guessed wrong on one of the coaches. I speculated that Sean Beckton would be fired along with the others, and that there was maybe more of a possibility that Ryan Held, who has been our probably ace recruiter, our best recruiter over the last 3 years with Scott, and has done a pretty good job of bringing talent to Lincoln, that he might be given a little bit of a break, on that. And he's also a alumnus of the university, so a fellow Husker. But it didn't happen. And Sean Beckton was the only one that survived. What surprised me probably was the timing, that we would do it this week. And I get it; it's a bye week, so you have 2 weeks. But and I don't know that Trev Albers necessarily expected Scott to then immediately fire the coaches. But I think maybe after his discussion with Trev, he realized, okay, I know what I'm going to be doing at the end of the season, and the signing day's coming up, and I need to move on right now and start figuring out this thing. So he decided to act immediately.
Yep. And what I texted to you as we were talking about it is, I think there's definitely still a debate about if this is the right decision, given Scott's track record, if it's right to give him another year at our current situation in the season. But if you are going to keep him, and it's clear that Trev has wanted to keep him, we've said that on past podcasts. I think if you were going to keep him, this was the right way to go about it in terms of announcing it now, like you said, during a bye week, but before the end of the season. So, it's clear to recruits that Scott's going to be around for at least another year.
Right.
And also making upfront that there were very serious discussions, reduction in money, certain, what do you want to say? Guidelines, right? Guidelines, expectations, things that Scott needs to achieve next year. We don't know any details on those, but we know that they exist. And then the fact that Scott did fire all those coaches, well, on the one hand, it makes me wonder who's going to be coach of the offense in our next game. But on the other hand, I think for the fan base, it was good to get that double punch back to back of Scott staying, and we're clearing house on a lot of these coaches, because that's the thing that a lot of people have been calling for Scott to do. And so it's Scott showing, I'm committed this time. I'm going to do what's necessary to set this program on the right track. Trev said in that press release that Scott had laid out a plan for Nebraska's future to him, a plan that he was on board with those conditions in place. So Scott's clearly, gambling a lot on this.
Exactly. And I think Trev has positioned the university where, yes, you will clearly be able to, accuse Trev of doing this for exclusively money reasons. And I think it's true that certainly part of this was to reduce the university's obligation. But I think he gave himself a window of opportunity, buy time, for himself to figure out what the next step for Nebraska will be if Scott doesn't fulfill the expectation, but at about the same cost. Because if we had fired Scott this year, his buyout was $20 million and his salary was $5 million. So just him alone would have been 25 million plus all the assistant coaches. So I mean, the university would have been writing some big checks, to the tune of $35 million probably over the next couple of years. Well, now I think that's potentially still going to be the case, but we delay that transition with Scott a whole year and give him one more year to right the ship. And Trev really wanted to do that based on his conversations with Scott and based on the desire that Scott's a Nebraskan and he's a Husker, and we want to give him every opportunity. No one will be able to accuse Trev Alberts of not giving Scott enough time.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's significant in that, because one thing we talked about on a previous podcast was that if Scott did only have 3 wins this year and it was a really disappointing season, he might negotiate with the university, because he cares about the university being his alma mater and everything else, that he would, decrease his buyout or, leave gracefully in some form or fashion to save the university some face and some money. And clearly here he took a hit to his own checkbook for that opportunity to have another chance, because clearly he wants to make this work. And like I said, I saw a lot of people comparing it to what happened with Jim Harbaugh, where I believe he cut his salary from $8 million a year to $4 million a year, a very drastic reduction, because he was not achieving the level of excellence that was expected from him at Michigan.
I think you're exactly right. I think, well, I'm okay with it. I mean, I kept going back and forth between just fire him and peel off the Band-Aid, right, and or the scab or whatever you want to say, and then let's go forward with whoever's next. But I think there was a part of Trev that just didn't want to do that he felt he needed and believed in Scott and his vision for the program, and wanted to give Scott that opportunity with a very, very tight and specific time frame. And we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen.
And to our point from a previous podcast, there's the point that Trev Alberts is a new AD, first time at a Division I school. He maybe hasn't had the time to establish all the contacts that he wants to, right, in terms of coaching networks and things of that nature. So now he basically has the time to kind of get those webs out there, with the knowledge that he might have to, pull the trigger and activate that if Scott has another disappointing year next year. Because they did say in this whole release that even though we'll be bringing in a new offensive coordinator, and obviously changing up quite a bit on the staffing side of things, they're not viewing this as okay, we've got another 3 years to get this working, guys. It's more of a no, we got to hit the ground running immediately. Which brings me to an interesting question. You may not have had the time to do much research into the thought, but Um, who, in an ideal world, who would you like Scott to get as his new offensive coordinator?
Yeah, I have no idea at this point. It's other than this. There's a couple of things. Scott has gone to the well of people that he's worked with before, and that were clearly part of the coaching tree of either himself um, or Chip Kelly, right? And so from that standpoint, that's a pretty limited number. Now he's looking at, I think, a broader variety of potential offensive coordinators. I don't think he's necessarily going to be able to go out there and get himself some big name offensive coordinator, right? We're gonna end up with somebody who maybe was quite successful at a lower division. That's what I think. Or we're going to get somebody who's a little long in the tooth, but who's got a great deal of experience and would be looking at this as a short time gig anyway, and is okay with the circumstance of not having a 5 year contract. You know what I mean? Like knowing that this could be a 1 year or 2 year kind of deal. I'm sure anybody that we hire for like offensive coordinator, they're going to get a 2 or 3 year contract.
Oh yeah,
We're going to be pretty much paying him the whole damn thing if Scott ends up getting fired.
right. I mean, I think in modern college football, you have to, I don't know about, do 1 year contracts really exist anymore?
Well,
Except for like
yeah,
younger coaches, maybe.
I was going to say it used to be that all assistant coaches were 1 year contracts and they were renewed every year. But nowadays, no. I think nowadays a lot of them are three
Right.
year for the assistants. So I wouldn't be surprised if the next person's going to get, and with some pretty full guarantees, like so that this person, even if they walk away, they're getting all that money, right?
Right.
So, um,
Um, I was thinking though, and I mentioned it to you before, that you know, it's really it's a hard task on the one hand because clearly, we've sucked for so long, we have this losing mentality, this choking at the end of games thing that really needs to be fixed. But on the other hand, it's clear that the team is so close in so many ways, right? And all you need to do really, I think if Scott gets to like 6 wins next year, say we're 6-6 and we go to a minor bowl game, I think that's obviously we would still be disappointed in a number of ways, but that would be enough to keep Scott going, I think, and to keep those assistants going. So it's really like not like you're being asked to, go start competing for the Big Ten championship year one, right? So I would feel like a good coach with a good, like you say, with experience and a proper
yep.
offensive system that they've developed should be able to come in, and if you can, pull it off right, you'd be like the savior of Nebraska, right? So
Right, exactly. And that's the thing is that if this group of coaches kind of gets the ball going in the right direction, then that could very well be a great gig for those guys, right? But Scott also needs to think about recruiting if he's hiring people for the longer term. You know what I mean? If he's hiring people for just next year, um, and then he'll deal with the consequences after that. Well, that's just perpetuating failure because then we're going to have a coaching staff that can't recruit. So you darn well better be on the permanent hires. Here's a question for you, Alex. What do you do for the Wisconsin game, which is coming up in a week and a half? You got to have coaches to coach these guys. And since we fired them immediately, now all of a sudden, that offensive coaching side is gone for the most part. So we need to go grab people, preferably directly from our graduate assistant group, our analyst group, and maybe a couple of retired coaches that know the program and are close to it, like Ron Brown, for example, who's a member of the athletic department, but is no longer involved in the coaching side of things, but has been a brilliant coach over a number of years.
right. Well, I definitely think, I mean, in terms of like calling the plays, it seems like Scott's been pretty involved with that himself, throughout this whole process. So I think he'll fill that spot of Matt Lubick on the offensive coordinator side of things for this
I agree.
temporary period. For the other position spots, I would agree with you that, older coaches or GAs, probably
Yeah,
stepping up into the roles. And I would hope at least that, I don't get the impression that this is coming out of nowhere from either Trev or Scott, that this is something they've said they've been having these long Sunday meetings for several weeks now. And so I feel like Scott had a plan that, like, okay, if things go badly, I'm gonna get rid of these guys and I'm gonna, quietly call so and so and say, hey, I may need you to step in for these last 2 weeks of the season. Can you do that for me? That's my guess.
yeah. Well, so I'm going to be curious to follow that and see what happens literally in this short term of these um, next few days to figure out if they even share um, what the what do you want to say what the plan is for the short term, and then longer term. I'm hopeful he's going to do a fairly national search because if you take care of the short term, right? Yes, I will concede that that's not the best thing to do from a recruiting standpoint for this particular recruiting cycle, but you need to make the right choices for your new staff members. They're going to be part of the team for all of the offseason and through into the 2022 year.
Right. I will say I saw on the Husker Reddit today that somebody was doing the classic tracking of a plane, and it was like left Omaha, went to Alabama, stopped off, somewhere else. It was going to all these, like Louisville, all these different big cities.
Uh
Um,
huh.
so, who knows what that might be, but it could possibly relate to this, short term, coaching situation, or maybe the more long term, talking to potential hires, who knows.
Right. I
Um,
mean, you got an LSU staff that's obviously going to be replaced at the end of the year, and there's some talented coaches on that staff. USC's got some talented coaches, so trust me, there's going to be talented coaches available. The question is, how do you entice them to choose the gig, right?
right.
I mean, how do they do that?
Yep. That's going to be the trick. Remind me, who is the guy on our staff who knows special teams really well, but isn't a special teams coach?
Billy Bush. Bush is his last name. Spelled more like the beer, though, I think, than it's not Bush, it's Busch, I believe. But and I have heard nothing about him being promoted or that of Scott, deciding that was important enough that he was going to. If he goes through this whole, change of coaches and we still don't have a special teams coordinator, I think Nebraska fans will completely lose it, and the outcry will be enormous. If Scott is that tone deaf to the problems that happen on the field every week, and he tried to minimize it by saying, well, this Ohio State game, it wasn't really about the uh, special teams. It was about the specialists. Okay. And well, I don't give a damn what it is. You're exactly right. It was about the specialist. It was about the punter and the kicker. It wasn't about somebody lining up wrong. It wasn't about an illegal procedure penalty on a field goal try or anything like that. It was about those guys not executing. Well, you know what? That's part of developing proper kicking game. And that means whoever's coaching your kicker and punter aren't getting them to move in the positive direction of consistency. And that's what a special teams coach would do. And, Bush has a history of being pretty good at it. So I'm hopeful, since we have him on the staff currently as a analyst, that he's right there, that this would be a nice opportunity. And I believe he is from Nebraska, from
Right.
Western
So,
Nebraska.
and I agree with you. I think it's so obvious, to just one out, just promote from within somebody who's familiar with the program and give him the chance to really, stretch his legs fully as a coordinator. But if the one thing is that if we do that, then obviously we lose an assistant coach at one of the other positions. So what's the coaching position you would sacrifice for the special teams position?
Well, currently we had an offensive coordinator who did not coach a position, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators also take on some role in coaching a position, right? So that's one option, and that of course depends on what the offensive coordinator's history is as a coach. So when that decision is made, that'll figure out whether that's an option. The other possibility is we had a quarterbacks coach. Again, you don't have to have one guy be the quarterbacks coach when Scott Frost is your head coach, right? It it would seem to me that Scott could reorganize his staff in such a way that that he took on the role of the quarterback room. But I think he's trying to do more of the CEO thing, so we'll see how that all plays out. Um, um, or we could assign, maybe Billy Bush doesn't get the job. Maybe he's spent enough time with Bush to know, what, he and I don't click. It's not going to work. And so he's going to stay in his analyst role, and I'm not going to give him the special teams job. And I'm going to go find an offensive coach who I need, like a running backs coach, who's also a great special teams coach. And I'm going to give somebody the job of being the running backs coach and special teams coach
Right.
combined, right? Which is still a little scary to me because again, the real reason there's not room for a special teams coach designated just for special teams in Nebraska structure is not so much the offensive coaches as it is the defensive coaches. We have an outside linebackers coach and an inside linebackers coach, and on a lot of teams just have a linebackers coach that coaches all of those positions.
Right.
Um, or so there's a lot of different ways you can organize that staff. You have 10 full-time assistants figured out, but you damn well better have an enormous amount of focus on special teams over the course of the next 14 months.
Yeah, I agree. If I see that he's, whether it's from within or from without, as long as we have a special teams coach, that's that would be a good sign to me that Scott, is aware of the
Yeah,
complaints and is working actively to fix them.
I agree. And if he doesn't do that, and we go in this next off season with no special teams coordinator and not an emphasis on that, then Scott will have demonstrated to me that he is completely tone deaf about what's really wrong with his football team, and it's almost assured that this next year will be a failure, and his plan that he put together will fail.
Very true. All right. Is there anything else you want to say about the coaching change, or shall we move on to week 10 of college football?
Well, I would say that as you might expect, the national and even the Big Ten media have all panned this decision as a horrible idea, and even Trev Albers has admitted that its likelihood for success is low, which is a bit of a head scratcher, right? So people outside basically are wondering, well, why the hell would you do that? And I think the answer is that I think money plays a part in this for sure, and I think God being a Nebraskan plays into this pretty significantly also. And then the third element is Trev Albers and his desire and willingness to work with Scott to see if we can turn this thing around. Because that's what Scott would want. That's what Trev would want.
Yep. I saw in that there's a nice interview he did on Monday after the big announcement. And one thing he mentioned was that there's a lot of responsibilities, that a head coach has that the public doesn't really know about. And, we've worked within the athletic department administration to take some of those responsibilities off of Scott's back. So that sounds like that's one kind of behind the curtain change that has happened under Albert's tenure. So I'm curious to see what ends up happening with that. I did see an interesting tweet here. I'm not sure who this guy is, Stuart Mandel, but he tweeted.
He's a very prominent national writer,
Okay.
sports writer.
There you go. Well, he said, in a year when schools have been tripping over each other to fire coaches ASAP, Nebraska is showing some old school patience / faith that the record doesn't tell the whole story.
It's true. exactly. And but I think that he's in a minority opinion there, where most people are not going to, because especially in today's sports world, patience is not a virtue.
Right. Oh, it's true, right? And like you said, Albert said it was a gamble. I think he said it was more uncertain rather than likely to fail.
Right,
Like that. This hasn't really been tried much before. Um,
right.
but at the very least, the speculation is over. Scott is saying so we can stop. The entire Cornhusker Nation can stop talking about whether he should be fired at the end of this year or not. We're with him for at least another year, and we'll see if he can turn the corner. Because I do see what Alberts is saying, in that like he's seen improvement in a lot of areas of the team, and we've seen it on the field this year in a number of areas. But it's the areas where we continue to make stupid mistakes. And give away close games and things of that nature, and play a quarterback when he has a broken jaw and a sprained ankle that are still
Right,
causing problems.
exactly. And so it's going to be interesting, a little bit entertaining, and very frustrating, I'm sure, over the next 12 or 14 months to figure out what we're doing. I think that, well, let me say this, Alex. The bigger challenge will be, I guarantee you there's going to be a significant, I don't know if it's over 50%, but a significant part of the Nebraska population of fan base that will not be happy with a 6-6 record like you described as the goal, or not the goal, but as the minimum standard. And so the question is 6-6 enough for Scott to keep his job? And I know that Trev didn't put a record number on there as the goal, right? Like he didn't say you got to win 7 games or something. But in the eyes of Nebraska fans, if we don't win 7 games, in my opinion, then that's going to be at best a 50-50 split among Husker Nation.
Mm-hmm.
I think there'll be plenty of people who are going to look at next year's schedule, which appears to be somewhat more palatable than this year's schedule if you just look at the names of the schools involved. We don't play Michigan State. We don't play Ohio State. I think we play Michigan. And then, Rutgers and somebody else. But guess what? Rutgers and Maryland and Indiana, those are the quote, quote, lesser teams from the East. Guess what? They're all better than us. So that's not a guaranteed victory just because we don't play Ohio State next year and we don't play Penn State.
Right. That's true. I mean, frankly, we've looked as closer against some of those quote unquote better teams than we have against the teams that are lesser than us, this
Right. I
year.
mean, we
So,
lost to Illinois.
yeah.
In fact, Illinois beat us more substantially than just about anybody. So,
Yep. Yeah. All right. So going over to week 10 of college football, there were some pretty interesting games this week, games that went closer than expected or big upsets, things like that. Probably the biggest one was number 3 ranked Michigan State, high off of a victory over their rival Michigan, came into a game against Purdue, who we just played and lost to. And Purdue continued that streak as the spoiler makers, as I think they're known, and won 40-29. I only watched the highlights of that game, but frankly, the score could have been a lot bigger because there was a lot of times where Purdue got a big play, got in the red zone, and then had to settle for a field goal. I think there were like 3 occasions like that, so the score could have been even higher.
I agree. And it's so classic Michigan State, right? And this is the downside of having an intense coach who ramps people up into a frenzy. It works when you're playing your rival Michigan to get you to play at a high level of intensity, but you're not able to sustain that every week over a long season, right? And so you're going to have games where you just the speed isn't there, and you gotta just be good enough to make it work anyway. And Michigan State wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and credit to Purdue as well. They really played well from what I saw. Like I remember there was one play where their quarterback looked like he was dead to rights in terms of getting sacked, and somehow he scrambled out of that situation and threw a pass right in the end zone for a touchdown on like third down or whatever. So it was a combo of, like you say, Michigan State playing a little flat and Purdue playing some of their best football.
Right, exactly. And when all of a sudden you're in the top four and you're being talked about on the college football playoff show, guess what? Target's on your back. Now you're the hunted.
Oh yeah. And then also there was Alabama versus LSU. It was at Alabama, which I believe made both of us predict that Alabama should be able to win that pretty soundly because of how down LSU has been this season. But it actually ended up being a close game, 20 to 14 loss by LSU to Alabama. And another one where when I watched the highlights, I frankly was frustrated with LSU because I think they like had a turnover like right in the red zone, like where
Yep,
they're about to score, and they had some boneheaded mistakes that really cost them some points.
they did.
Because it seemed like Alabama really wasn't playing that well that day, but their offense just couldn't capitalize on the opportunities the defense was giving them.
Right, right. Well, and that's the thing. And this when we go through this, it's going to play into the rankings that we're going to discuss later in the show. And it's amazing to me how all these teams, Alabama being one of them, just did not rise to the occasion, and now they've created a major problem for the playoffs. So, yeah, Alabama blew an opportunity to really establish themselves, and yet it didn't hurt them because all the other teams that could have put some pressure on Alabama didn't do it either because they struggled,
Right.
including obviously Ohio State against us. We had our chances to win that football game. We were absolutely in it to the end and had competed with them extremely well, way better than people expected, which means Ohio State didn't play very well.
Mm-hmm. Very true. It was kind of an interesting game in the Big Ten. Two teams that have beaten Nebraska played each other. Illinois versus number 20 ranked Minnesota. Illinois actually won that 14-6. So, they lost like game after game after playing against us. But it seems like they've kind of found a new spark here in the latter part of the season because they've had some upset wins here recently.
They have because they're finally starting to figure it out. Again, I think Coach Bellama's coaching philosophy is he understands who he is and what he's trying to do, and it's not rocket science. It's not super complicated, and it's the basic fundamentals of football: blocking and tackling and playing with intensity. And that's all he's asking his guys to do. It's not all the sophisticated, route formations and things like what we're trying to do with Scott's offense. And as a result, the ability to move a team from point A to point B in terms of their expertise execute from an execution standpoint is just so much easier than it is with Scott's offense.
Mm-hmm. And then there's Texas A&M versus Auburn, ranked 14th and 13th. We actually predicted that one on our previous podcast. You predicted that Texas A&M would win 38-24, and I predicted that Auburn would find a way to win because I like their quarterback, 35-31. But it ended up being a more low-scoring game, kind of dominated by Texas A&M of 20-3.
Yeah, and Auburn looked horrible. I mean, they just kept making a horrible mistake, particularly Bo Nix, the quarterback that you liked.
Yeah. So yeah, kind of funny that both Auburn and Alabama didn't play great this week. And then of course they're going to play each other in the Iron Bowl at the end of the year. And we all hope, of course, that Auburn can find a way to be the spoiler makers like Purdue, right, and find a way to get the upset. But if Nix is playing like that, I don't think it's going to happen.
Exactly. I wouldn't count on it.
Right. And last game we'll mention here is Tulsa versus Cincinnati. Cincinnati being a top-ranked team in the college football playoff. And it ended up being a 28-20 victory for Cincinnati over Tulsa. But it had one of the wildest endings to a game I've seen in a long time. Once again, I watched the highlights, not the game live. But I believe how it went was like it was near the end of the game. There was only like a minute or so left on the clock, maybe two. And Tulsa had like a fourth and like 8, but with at near the goal line. But if they got to like the 1 yard line, they'd get a first down. It was one of those situations. They were like just the yard short, right? So then Cincinnati gets the ball on like the 2 yard line, and then they go under center, and somehow the ball immediately gets fumbled and like pops out over to the side, and Tulsa gets it. So now all of a sudden the situation's totally flipped, and Cincinnati, who had the chance to just run out the clock and win the game, now Tulsa's got the chance to score again. And then I think it gets to like a third or fourth down at the goal line, and their guy, they give the ball to like one of their big dudes, like a tackle or something. And the guy reaches over the pile and actually has the ball like over the line, but he drops it. He like fumbles the ball as he's reaching it out, and it goes to Cincinnati, and they end up winning. So like both teams were fumbling it back and forth to each other basically to end the game. It's really weird.
That's crazy. Well, yes, and and so Cincinnati didn't play well this week either, but it didn't hurt them because neither did any of the teams ahead of them. And obviously, Michigan State lost,
except for Georgia. Georgia,
yeah, well,
played somebody and crushed them like 38-8 or something.
Right. Other than Georgia,
right? Yeah. We will save this discussion for a future podcast, maybe in the off season. But it's definitely something I'm catching as a theme for this year, and I think it's worth discussing. Is just the lost art of going under center in modern college football. Because, like I said, as soon as Cincinnati did that, they fumbled the ball. We've done that this year as Nebraska. I've seen it happen to other teams where they make mistakes going under center, in those sorts of critical short yardage situations.
Yeah. That would be a good discussion. That's a great discussion.
I figured you'd like that one. All right. And then looking ahead to week 11, as we mentioned, Nebraska has a bye. So nothing for us this week until the game against Wisconsin the following weekend. Though there is some interesting games in the Big Ten, particularly Michigan versus Penn State.
Yep.
Oh, do you know if that's at home for Michigan?
It's at Penn State, but it's a noon game. It's a noon Eastern time game, which makes it way easier for Michigan
versus a night game.
Yes, because a night game whiteout at Penn State is brutal, and they're not getting that. Penn State is coming off of a tougher than expected game that they had last week, and so I think the situation just does not line up very well for Penn State to win this football game. I don't think they have the home field advantage that they would if it was at night, and so Michigan's got to feel pretty good about their opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just checked here. Michigan played Indiana this past weekend and beat them 29-7. So a solid win for them.
Yeah, solid, not spectacular. They didn't blow them out or anything, but again, I think Michigan's going to be building some momentum. If anything, Michigan's hopefully over the headache of the Michigan State game, because that was a very physical and hard fought game. But at the same time, there were points, especially in the second and third quarter, where it looked like Michigan had a chance to create separation and run away and hide, and they didn't get it done. Right. And that's the kind of thing that as you're going through a season, if a team can overcome that and learn from that, and then the next time they're in that situation, recognize it and go ahead and say, okay, we have a chance to put our foot on the throat of this team and finish it, then they do it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, what is your prediction for this Michigan Penn State game?
My prediction is going to be a Michigan victory. It's harder for me to know what the ultimate score is going to be because Michigan is not as complete a football team as they would probably like to be. They struggle at times to run the football, um, and uh, and their passing is just okay. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a lower scoring game. So it might not be a blowout, but I think ultimately Michigan wins. Um, if I had to put numbers on it, I'm going to say it's going to be like um, 27 Michigan to 17 Penn State.
Okay. Well, I'll also predict a Michigan victory here, um, going along the same lines as you. They kind of might have gotten a little boost from the where they got ranked in the college football playoff rankings, which we'll get to here in a moment. I'll go ahead and predict that it'll be a little higher scoring game, and the Penn State will keep it close because it is at home and everything else for them. Um, but that Michigan does pull it out in the end. So I'll go ahead and say it'll be 35 Michigan to 28 Penn State.
Okay. Yep. Yep. So we're both saying, 7-10 point victory.
Yep. Um, some other interesting games. There's Oklahoma. This is kind of interesting, actually. Oklahoma's playing Baylor right after Baylor got upset by TCU last weekend. And then on the flip side, TCU is playing against Oklahoma State. So both Texas teams playing against both Oklahoma teams there.
Right. Now, and Oklahoma State won their game. Who were this past weekend? They played, I think, West Virginia or somebody and beat them. And so is still very much in the thick of things. And yeah, the Baylor loss is devastating for Baylor, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I watched the highlights of that one, and TCU's quarterback was just getting so many deep balls
Yes.
thrown. So it was one of those kind of crazy Big 12 type, no defense kind of games, it seemed like.
Right, where they were just moving back and forth across the field.
Yeah, definitely one of those. Of interest to us as Nebraska fans, of course, is our upcoming opponent, Wisconsin. They'll be playing against Northwestern this week. Northwestern just lost to Iowa 17-12 last weekend, and it is at Wisconsin. So I'm feeling pretty good that Wisconsin should have that game under control, though Northwestern does have a tendency to surprise teams.
Yes, but I think at the end of the day, Northwestern is still down talent wise, and Wisconsin is really finding themselves. So I'm also expecting a Wisconsin victory, but because it is Northwestern, Gerald and his team, they'll find a way to make it ugly and muddy it up and keep it competitive. But Wisconsin's the better team.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and give a score prediction here first. And I'll say that Wisconsin wins, and it will end up being, let's say, a little more low scoring here. Maybe 31 Wisconsin to 14 Northwestern.
Okay, so yeah, comfortable victory for Wisconsin. I'm going to say that you're probably pretty close on Wisconsin's scoring. So I'm going to say I'll go 28 Wisconsin to 17 Northwestern.
Okay, a little bit closer. Very good, very good. And then, as we've been teasing throughout the podcast, the playoff rankings did come out today on Tuesday, and the top four rankings weren't very surprising since Michigan State lost. Obviously, they dropped out, so everybody else just moved up one spot. So now it's Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, Ohio State, with Cincinnati now at number 5. Interestingly, number 6 is Michigan. Number 7 is Michigan State, which I think is curious because in the similar situation, right, with Ohio State and Oregon, right next to each other with the same record of one loss, they gave the edge to Oregon because they had the head to head over Ohio State. But here they didn't give the head to head to Michigan State, even though they have that win over Michigan. Do you think that's just due to Purdue being perceived as a worse loss?
I think that is exactly it. And in watching the show, I did watch that portion of the show where they were discussing that, and all the ESPN talking heads were all, very much, debating the benefits or the proper thing to do in that situation, and we're somewhat split on it in terms of some of them saying, hey, no way, Michigan State should be ahead of Michigan. That's crazy because they both have one loss and the head to head is in favor of Michigan State. But others were looking at the whole body of work thing, right? And looking at the other games. So the fact that Michigan State had to go in overtime to beat us is coming back to haunt them, right? Now all of a sudden, style points, when you start looking at the overall body of work and not just an individual game, and everybody acknowledges that the Michigan State game was a very tightly contested game. It was one play here or there that changed that outcome, right? So it's not like that was a dominating performance or anything like that. So, but they also kind of threw up, which is true, but they threw up the premise that, listen, Michigan State still has to play Penn State and Ohio State. Um, and Michigan has to play Penn State and Ohio State. So, there's lots of games to be played. And so the disparity between those two teams is likely to work itself out over these next 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense to
Now,
me.
I think the bigger issue is because Michigan didn't necessarily look great, and that Michigan State lost and fell back, has allowed Cincinnati now to work their way into that fifth position. Well, if you look at those top four, Ohio State still has to play Michigan and Michigan State, right? I don't know who they play this week, but they may have third game in there. But those are the two big ones, right? Oregon still has to play some teams, and then at the end of the year play in the Big 12 or the Pac-12 championship game. So they have some opportunities to lose, and then Alabama and Georgia are going to play each other most likely in the SEC championship game. So there's going to be losses there. It's guaranteed, right? So unless you have the circumstance like you're saying, where you have an Alabama beat a Georgia, and then uh, Georgia stays in the top four, right, because of body of work, and that's their only loss, then Cincinnati is going to end up in that top four.
Well, the one that you're neglecting to mention here is Oklahoma. Now, in the current ranking, they are
Good point.
eighth on the list, but they are 9-0. Now, it's a bit of an ugly 9-0, which I think is why they're down. But I think if
Right.
if they win out, win the conference, they could still very easily make it in over Cincinnati.
Well, but now you've put yourself in that position where all of a sudden the Power Five team is going to leapfrog the Group of Five team in the last week because of the conference championship game and the overall strength of schedule. And I totally agree with it, but it's going to cause this massive ruckus, among people who are like, well, that's not fair. You need to, why was Cincinnati up there and ahead of Oklahoma all this time, and then you pull the rug out from underneath right at the end of the year. Don't set yourself up to do that. And what if they're already there? If Cincinnati's already in that top four or maybe even third position, my gosh, what happens then? So then Cincinnati's going to stay in, is what's going to happen. But there's always a chance, because it was almost proved this past week. We just discussed the game that Cincinnati will lose a game because they're letting a lot of teams that aren't very good hang around with them.
Yep, which is another thing that they can the committee can point to. It'd be one thing if they were in a lesser conference and they were blowing everybody out by 20 points or more. but
Right.
they're struggling against Tulane and the like, to win. Um, and then we've got Oklahoma here, who is also, say, undefeated by the end, and has played against tougher competition, even if the Big 12 is a little down this year, et cetera, et cetera. So now, if Oklahoma loses somewhere along the way and is the Big 12 champion, but has one loss, then it gets more interesting, I think. And that's where they would really have a good argument.
Then what's going to frustrate me is they get in, and then you've got some team just on the outside of that four, on the outside looking in, who legitimately would have given a much better competition within that group of the final group of four, and by golly, they don't get that opportunity to compete for a championship because we had to give this to this undefeated Cincinnati team that frankly has not played a schedule that in past years, before this playoff set up, they wouldn't have sniffed that opportunity, right? And now they're getting it, even though they didn't play a very tough schedule.
Are you thinking that the committee is facing more pressure towards Cincinnati because of, say, like, the UCF's undefeated season, and the fact that they just went to a bowl game, that they didn't make it into the top four, and then they won that bowl game? I believe it was over Auburn or somebody like that.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and I think so. That's the argument from the group of five team conferences to say, hey, we deserve an opportunity. And the problem is, you know what? The table's too small. There still isn't enough seats at the table to allow that to happen when you've got these other teams. I mean, I'm sorry. Cincinnati plays in the Big Ten this year, and they probably have 3 or 4 losses already.
Right.
So, I mean, just doesn't work. It's somewhat apples and oranges when you consider the rigor of the entire season.
Yeah, just ask Scott Frost.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's something we didn't bring up yet, so maybe we bring it up briefly here right now. Is getting back to just a little bit of Nebraska talk. Is that if Nebraska was still in the Big 12, what would their record be? My argument is that the mistakes that they made and the way that they competed and the prolific nature of their offensive capabilities probably would have lent itself to better performance in the Big 12 and the Pac-12 and even the ACC this year. And in all likelihood, Nebraska would be looking at having 2 or 3 or 4 more wins. We might very well be 7-3 right now if we were in the Big 12. And so the reality is Scott just picked a bad year to have a team that has this Achilles heel when he's playing 4 top 10 teams in one season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The schedule, I mean, the Big Ten in general is tough, and then this particular schedule we had this year is extra tough. So there's no doubt that that's a factor. Though I think you would also have to take into account the extra passing, spread offense capabilities, right, of those Big 12 offenses, like we were just talking about with TCU, these quarterbacks that can throw, 50-yard passes accurately.
Oh yeah.
That would be something we would have to contend with defensively as well.
Correct. Which we don't have to as much in the Big Ten because we don't have that prolific of a quarterback group this year.
Right. Very true.
So there's truth there for sure. Maybe our defense wouldn't have looked so good in some of those leagues because of that more impressive offensive output from quarterbacks.
Right. Yep. So it's an interesting ranking this particular week. We'll be keeping an eye on that as we move forward here throughout the season. I was just thinking, if we do that, our game and our podcast in person will have to be before the playoff rankings come out.
It would be.
So we might have to do, but that's just before the conference championship games. So
correct. It won't be the final.
Right. The final will come after that, but we'll still be able to talk about, who the top teams are. Yeah. We'll pretty much know at that point. So.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. It's now, what's the big game in the SEC, or is this another one of these weeks Alabama's going to be playing, Little Sisters of
Um,
the Poor because it's their week to play a non-conference game late in the season so they can prepare themselves for their final run and get themselves healthy.
I don't think Alabama's playing anybody of interest. Texas A&M is playing against Ole Miss. That's the big game I saw.
Yeah, okay. So that's not really all that big of a game, I think, from a national perspective. It is obviously for where they are going to end up lining up over time in the SEC. Yeah, in the ranking order of the SEC, but not really a major national one. I wonder if a lot of those teams, like Georgia, I don't think they've played their Little Sisters of the Poor late in the season game yet. So that might be happening this week. I don't know, but so maybe this is not going to be a big, other than the Michigan Penn State game, and there's got to be some stuff out in the Pac-12, like who's Oregon playing this week? I don't know.
Right. Well, they just got off their win over Washington, so
That's true. That was a huge win for them. So maybe they lesser team this week. I don't know. We'll see.
okay.
But
Yes.
all right, buddy.
We'll see on many fronts here. Lots of unknowns for Nebraska now with our new coaches. What's going to happen next year in this all important year, and then also more short term, what's going on with the playoff rankings and Cincinnati, and plenty going on in college football to keep us all interested.
Absolutely. That is a true statement.
All right. So if you all of you out there enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can reach out to us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can also search for us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify if you search for College Football Throwdown. You can leave us a rating or a review. We love hearing from the fans. Constructive criticism is always appreciated. So thank you all out there for listening, and thank you for joining me, Dad. And until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.